This is my first YouTube instructional video. I do a lot of small engine stuff, tinkering around in the garage. Somebody suggested that I should make an instructional video and post it on YouTube. So this is my first one. If you like it, you can leave comments below, like the video. This is one way to do it, and this is my way. By no means am I a mechanic at all. I don't claim to be. I just like to tinker around and come up with new and different ways to do things. This wasn't my idea either. I pieced it together from different readings and different videos, but I never could find a video that showed me exactly what to do from start to finish. So I decided I would gather all that knowledge and put it into one place for you. So enjoy. We have here is a 1956 Evinrude Fastwin, 15 horsepower, and as you can see here, that's the connector for this for the pressurized fuel system that come on most 1950 outboard motors. The way this one works is I've already disconnected the lines, but on the back side here you have one line and the second line, and this line would actually come up to the manifold there, and then your second line would come over here to the carburetor. And the way these types of systems worked is, rather than have a fuel pump, as the engine ran, it would send pressure out of the manifold, and I'll show you this after I get this disassembled, and down this line. And this line would go back to a metal fuel tank, and it would pressurize that metal fuel tank between 5 and 7 psi. Then, since the fuel tank is now pressurized, it would send the fuel back up and into this line through and to the carburetor to fire the engine. Now, the problem with this is you take a metal container, you pressurize it, and you fill it with an explosive fuel, and you essentially have a bomb on your boat. The air that comes down this line to pressurize the tank comes straight out of the manifold. So if you have a scored cylinder or anything like that, and a piece of metal flies off your cylinder and comes down this line, that bomb, all it needs is a charge to set it off. And a scored cylinder shooting a hot, fiery piece of metal down this line could definitely set that off. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to convert that from a pressurized fuel system into a single line fuel system that can be used with any modern day fuel tank. In the 60s, manufacturers realized that they were doing nothing but setting bombs up on boats, and so they changed it to the single line fuel system. This motor here was given to me by a gentleman that said it was the motor was froze up. So I've already taken the cover off and taken the pull start off. If you need instruction on how to do that, I would suggest that this video is probably too advanced for you to begin with, and to take yours to somebody who knows what they're doing. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is take off these knobs. You really only need to take off this first one to get the air intake off, but we're going to take off all three of them. So they're really simple. Just hold the knob, take a flathead screwdriver, and take the screw out. The screw doesn't hold the knob on, it just spreads out the rod that it sits on. So take the screw all the way out, and then it just slides off. And you can put the screw back in so you don't lose it. The knob for the choke is a little different. This screw has to come all the way out because it actually attaches to the choke. Okay, once you got all the knobs off, then it's only 4 more screws to take out. You're going to take out this one up here, and then there's one on the other side here. And then if you look down here underneath, you'll see 2 more right here. And so we'll take these off and get this air intake off. Then once those 4 are off, this just slides off and you have your carburetor sitting right there. And again, you can put the screws back where they go so that you don't lose them. Alright, so the next step you want to do is you want to take your throttle arm off. There was a cotter pin that held that one in, but it's not there. So we'll just slide that out of there. And then there's two nuts on the back here that hold your carburetor on. We'll go ahead and get those off. These are 1/2 inch nuts here. So I'll create another video and show you guys how to take this carburetor apart and clean it really good so that it works out. Get all the jets and the needles cleaned. And again, put the nuts back so that you don't lose them or forget where they go. Alright, so if you look down here, here is the air. This is the nipple where the air leaves the manifold and pressurizes the fuel tank. So we're going to take this whole manifold cover off. There's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there's also a hidden one. It's a flat one back here, number 8. And we'll get those taken off. Now for these, I'm just going to drop them in the bottom here. That way I don't lose these. There's no reason to put them back. Now, there might be many different ways on how you can make this type of conversion, but this one's the simplest way, the cheapest way. That's really it's reversible. It doesn't, if you want to keep the since it's so old, if you want to keep it original and keep it pressurized, you can do it this way and make sure it runs. And you can have a bomb on your boat, or you can then reverse this type of conversion. Really simple. Alright, so this manifold is still connected up here. I've already loosened the screw on the back side, but if you look on the back, there's another flathead screw. If you loosen that up, you can slide that right off, and then this whole piece will slide right out. And then your whole manifold cover comes off. So if you look in here really good, how this works is behind here is your two cylinders. As one cylinder comes back, it draws air in through the intake. As it comes out, it pushes air out of one of these here. These are called your check valves. And as that air comes out, it goes through the manifold, out this nipple, down to the gas tank, pressurizes the gas tank. Now that the gas tank is pressurized, it sends the fuel back up through this other line and into your carburetor. So we're going to make a conversion to make this a one-line fuel system. So set the manifold to the side. The first step here is we're going to remove these check valves. It's just two flathead screws right here that hold these check valves on. So we're going to take these guys off. I suggest keeping this just in case, so that you can always make the conversion back if you'd like to. You'll just put the check valves back on. So take that and put it somewhere that you'd need it. Put it somewhere that you'd need it in case you want to make the conversion back. So you can go to any hardware store if you want to, and you can take these are vent tube caps. I took this one here, shaved it off a little bit, and basically all you're going to do is you're going to plug one of these check valve holes. Now you want to trim the vent cap so that when it's long enough and you put the manifold cover back on, it's going to hold that vent cap in place. So now as the pistons fire and the air comes out, it's only coming out of one hole and not both. And what we're going to do is we're going to run that vent tube down to a pulse activated fuel pump. If you had both lines open and we ran that vent tube out of the manifold, then as both lines get to that fuel pump, you'd have one line pushing. It would be pushing and pulling at the same time, so the fuel pump wouldn't work properly. So that's all you need to do right there. And to make the conversion, you just take that off and take your vent cap back out, put your check valves back on. So we're going to put that in there. Like so. And then we're going to replace our manifold cover. Actually, we're going to go ahead and get these old tubes out of the way. They're a piece of garbage. Alright, so we got that out of the way. Actually, before we put the manifold cover on, go to the local hardware store when you're getting your vent caps. Get yourself some vent tube. Just get a couple feet of it. It's a couple of dollars. And before we put this on, we're going to go ahead and put this on this nipple here. It's easier to do it while the manifold cover's off rather than trying to get in underneath there and put this tube on. So there we go. That's on, just like that. And let your tube hang for now. And we'll put this back together real quick. Make sure your cap or your vent stays, your plug stays in there. So put it in there like that. Make sure our manifold cover goes on. Now, if there's not a little bit of gap, as you can see, that one wiggles a little bit. And the reason it's wiggling is because that vent cap is sticking out. And that's the perfect length, because as we tighten these screws down, it's actually going to push it in there. If this manifold cover sits flush, then you've cut your vent cap too short and it's not going to plug the check valve hole. We'll get a couple of these started just to make sure that vent cap stays in place. Alright, that's the simple conversion, and next we're going to remove the dual fuel line connector here with a single line, and we're going to install the aftermarket Pulse fuel pump and run the lines to it, reconnect the carburetor, and that should be it. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is remove the fuel connector here, and we'll get that replaced. The only thing that holds that on is there's a small bolt underneath. I've already loosened this one, so just lift it up, spin it, and as you can see, it's just this bolt here. So this is the connector that I have on my fuel tank here, and this connects to this connector on my Suzuki outboard. So what I did is I just bought another connector exactly like this one and connected it to some fuel line. That way I can use the same gas tank for both motors. Alright, so next what I did is I've taken the connector and just simply used some zip ties and secured it down to where it's sticking off enough ran the new fuel line through and underneath, and I just have it hanging here. That along with my vent tube, just hanging out. The next step is we'll connect the fuel line to the carburetor, put the carburetor back on, run a new fuel line from the carburetor off, and then we'll connect all 3 tubes to the new fuel pump. You'll have 3 tubes. You'll have your vent tube coming from the manifold, your fuel line coming from the fuel tank connector, and then the third will be the line going into the carburetor. As soon as I get that fuel pump in, we'll get that put on and hopefully get this thing running. So my fuel pump came in, and this one here is a Most Plus brand. It's just, you can get any pulse activated fuel pump, and they go on lawnmowers, snow machines, scooters, anything that isn't gravity fed by the tank and doesn't have a fuel pump on it already. My camera girl's in school, so I've only got one hand. Connected this just so you guys could see how this is set up. So if you look on here, you've got an arrow in and then an arrow out right here. So this line here connects directly to the fuel tank connector, or the connector that will connect to the fuel tank. So if you follow that line all the way back, that one's going to route around and go to here. So that line there goes to the arrow pointing in. The arrow pointing out is going to leave this fuel pump, loop back around, and connect to your carburetor. The center line here, that is what's going to pulse activate this fuel pump. So that is the line that leaves the manifold. That's the vent tube that we put on, and that's the line that leaves the manifold. So as the engine fires, it's going to push air down into that pump, and it's going to push a diaphragm back and forth. That's going to allow a suction and a push for the fuel to get to the carburetor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim these lines up and mount the fuel pump, and then we'll get it running. Just note that whenever you mount your fuel pump, you can mount it wherever you can. Just be aware that on these engines, this is going to be spinning here. Your wheel is going to be spinning. Also take into consideration that you're going to have to turn your motor, so don't mount it anywhere that's going to get tangled up. And also back here, when you shift your gears and you give it throttle, these lines here is going to pull. So just be aware of that. But mount it anywhere you can. Use some zip ties, bolts, whatever you got. Just be creative with it. I'm going to get this one mounted up, and we'll put the cover on and see if it'll fire. So I have mine mounted to the side. I just used some zip ties, zip tied it to the frame there. Got mine facing backwards right now because I put the vent tube connector towards the inside. There was a hole already in the frame. So if you can see it right there, that's where mine's connected. And then it just runs out back around and into the manifold. Even on the back side here, if you get confused, there's small arrows here out. So this line here goes to the carburetor, and then that small arrow right there coming in, this line comes from the connector here. So now I'll put the covers back on and put the knobs back on and be good to go. All right, so I got the fuel pump put on, I got the cover put back on, got it hooked up to the fuel tank, and I got my bucket filled with water, and so we're gonna fire it up. You're gonna take your low speed idle knob seated fully to the right, and I'm sorry, your low speed and your high speed, seat them both fully clockwise. Pull the choke, twist it to start, and fire it up. Hopefully it goes. Just like that, it's running.